I'm back because once again the internet wants to act like a bunch of children. And now that I've alienated most of you, let's actually get into what we're about to talk about. Earlier this week at E3, during the Treehouse Live for Pokemon Sword and Shield, Junichi Masuda sheepishly, you could say, dropped the news that only Pokemon in the Galar Region Pokedex will be able to go from Pokemon Home into Sword and Shield, essentially saying that if it is not in the regional dex or the expanded regional dex post E4, if there is one, it is not going to be coded into the game. And this has caused a sheer amount of outrage across the board. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to break it down, and I'll give my opinion, but I want to set some groundwork and facts and a foundation that the internet just wants to completely ignore to shift narrative. And that is where I draw the line. I'm not about that. So, again, I will share my opinion at the end, but I'm going to lay down some foundations and groundwork here. You can see initially at this revelation and reveal of this that Game Freak doesn't necessarily feel the most comfortable with this decision either. This isn't a translation error. This isn't anything of the sort that could be misconstrued. This was a very calculated public announcement. There is no translation error. They didn't mince words. This is them saying this is the paradigm shift going forward more than likely. It was very calculated. You can see that there's probably been a lot of what am I saying? There's been a lot of back and forth within Game Freak themselves trying to figure out the best way to go about this. And you can see that it's not necessarily the easiest decision that they had to make, nor is this Junichi Masuda's decision alone. Let's also clear the air on that. This also seems to be something that has been discussed for a while, and they want to get it out of the way now rather than at launch. There's going to be pushback no matter what, but by getting this out of the way now, it's at least going to lessen the blow once the games themselves come out. That is important from a review and ratings and just general conversation because things trend on the internet. And you'd rather get the bad news done and out of the way with before it's affecting sales directly at launch time. That also allows them to hear feedback that could potentially influence things down the road. But we'll get into that. The other thing is that this seems like a relatively new decision. And what I mean by that is that ever since the Generation 3 days, when the entire IV, EV, Pokemon creation mechanics changed essentially permanently going forward, and the hardware change was essentially set up to allow transfer, they have talked about how they want stuff to come back and keep traveling through different journeys with people. Even as recently as Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, they talked about that connectivity. In Oris, you got a special diploma if you brought something up from a Gen 3 game. In Ultra Sun and Moon, you had special backgrounds in the photo simulator that were dedicated to Pokemon that came from specific generations. If you look at Pikachu, they brought stuff from Go. The entire idea of Pokemon over the last handful of years has been this continual shift of bringing things forward, continuing those journeys, and then you have the peripherals like the Pokeball Plus, the Pokewalker, etc., and even to an extent Pokemon Go, that are to take Pokemon away from the games and keep them going with you in life or away from the games themselves in your everyday life. So they've been focusing on connectivity and longevity for years at this point. I don't necessarily think this is a rash decision that they're just Thanos snapping away half the decks because they want to create some kind of DLC threshold to milk out the system money-wise. It has also been shown and talked about and discussed how the 1,000+ threshold number has been a concern of theirs for a long time coming. And we've seen them combat this in two different ways at the very least. The first was in Pokemon X and Y, we got Megaforms. These gave us new Pokemon without adding to the Dex number. In Alola for Gen 7 and Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon, we got Alolan forms. It achieves the same purpose. It brings something new to the table without adding to the Dex number. This is something that has been prepared for in the sense that they knew that eventually the numbers were going to get astronomically high. On top of that, completing a National Dex now, if you were to start from scratch, is incredibly time-consuming, time-demanding, and actually offers a lot of time-consuming value to your game. But a lot of people don't take the time to do that. Casual fans normally use a lot of what they like. Competitive battlers just go right to breeding for competitive mods. Not everyone also has a living dex that they can just port over to complete it to get whatever it's worth. So by having certain certificates, items, and things of the like attached to just the regional dexes, you make the goal more attainable for somebody starting from scratch, which happens quite frequently. So it's not necessarily that they're just getting rid of things on a whim. This seems like a very calculated decision on, we want to make the regional dex much more focused, and we want to make the challenges obtainable without consuming the greater portion of 1 month to 3 months, if that's all you wanted to do. The next thing that I see people throwing around all the time is that with Pokemon being as lucrative as it is financially, why don't they just hire more people? Or why don't they just delay the game? Things of that nature. And there's two parts to this. The first is that you can't just throw money at a problem. It doesn't work that way, especially for things like game design. And I'll give you two examples here. The Legend of Zelda series essentially has an infinite money source from Nintendo directly. Those development cycles still take 6 years, and they have unlimited funds and huge teams working on it. The Call of Duty franchise might not be what it used to be, but there's no denying its success from about 2007 to about 2014, call it, in their dev cycles. They have a ton of money too. Activision is making in the billions range off these games. But those games are still buggy and have problems and need updates constantly. So those are two games that have essentially unlimited budgets and have very different problems that Pokemon also is now facing. Secondly, you can't just add more workers. By adding workers, especially in an animation and modeling component, actually can slow down work, because now you're working under very specific code, you're working under very specific quality assurance principles, and you're having final outcome products that are very demanding. So by adding more workers, not only are you expanding the amount of pieces moving around, which can also facilitate error, you now have to delay in terms of training, because you have to bring these new people in. And just because you bring someone in does not mean they're going to work out. So while Game Freak creates very high-level games in terms of the appeal and money that they bring in, it's not as if you can just throw money at the problem and magically have it go away. Pokemon is also a symptom of its own success. And we forget about this, that Game Freak is just one part of the Pokemon Company International, which runs everything. Game Freak themselves and the games themselves while incredibly lucrative in what they make, are not the highest selling point of the franchise. Merchandise is. But merchandise, the TCG, the anime, and movies are all dependent on the reality set by the games. The games are essentially the anchor to what is going on in the rest of the franchise. And a delay at this day and age doesn't really work for Pokemon because they have so many things in motion. By delaying the core game, you now start delaying TCG sets that have been in print and in process for quite some time. You start screwing with anime schedules because they've been closing down arcs and starting storyboards for the new games and new arcs. You start messing with movie times because movies need to be greenlit, scripts need to be written depending on the animation. All that goes into effect months, if not years in advance. Merchandising that has been scaled, modeled, drawn, sent off to be produced is all on very specific timetables using other companies to produce it, which have other demands from other companies as well. So by delaying the games, you now set in motion a huge chain of events. So unlike games like Animal Crossing, where there's nothing else attached to it, a delay can happen there. A game like Pokemon has to run on a very tight time frame and window. And while you might not agree with that being the case of the core game needs to drive the rest of it, that's what the current reality is, and it's not something we can just ignore. Next, the big thing thrown around is the models are the problem. These models have been future-proofed since Black and White 3DS Pokedex Pro application. They've been upscaled and they've been in place for this exact purpose. The problem is not the models at all. All they're doing each year now is creating new models. And in the case of Glameow, I think that was the only model that's ever been changed in a non-specific generation that it was debuting in. But besides that, the models themselves are relatively similar. What is changing, however, are animations. And animations are not just battle animations. They are not just battle animations. And I'm going to say that one more time. They are not just battle animations. First of all, if we want to talk about animations, we see people screaming about how each Pokemon doesn't have unique moves to fit it in terms of animations. At the current moment, you'd be looking at over 590,000 unique animations just for moves. Just for moves. That is clearly out of the question. Secondly, animations that they're referring to when they say that we are cutting back on the Pokemon because of animation quality and fidelity is dealing with camp via the leak, or what we know now as refresh or Ami. All of those expressions, animations, we're talking idle animations, we're talking overworld animations, facial expressions, and we're talking cutscene animations. And if you look at Pokemon's games, especially once they went to 3D from XY to Oris, from Oris to Sun and Moon, and to Sun and Moon to Ultra Sun and Moon, the cutscenes have gotten better, they've gotten more intricate, they've gotten more stylized. So you cannot tell me that the jump from the 3DS to the Switch is not going to have even a bigger impact on that same thing. There's just no way that's not the case. So you can look, for example, right now, the big thing from E3 is Score Bunny and Double Kick. Double Kick has always been a relatively lackluster animation to begin with, but if you notice, Score Bunny didn't even have a physical attack animation itself yet. All Score Bunny had was the idle animation. And every Pokemon has a special animation and a physical animation. Score Bunny did not have that yet. It is very likely that these E3 demos that are being shown right now are very early on builds that are guaranteed bugless. So these are probably early builds of this game that are missing a lot of key components but are guaranteed to run without flaws or bugs. So The games aren't out yet. We're seeing demo footage. And you want to throw your gauntlets down about a double kick animation. Let's take a step back on that. And I'm not even trying to use the argument of, well, you're going to get rid of the move in 3 levels anyway, it doesn't matter, because it should still have a good animation. But the problem is we're taking demo footage and acting as if that's the final product. We need to be calmed down and careful about how we look at what's presented in demos. We've already seen from the first reveal to the second reveal, certain things like lighting and shaders have already changed in textures. We've seen the washed out colors be a little less and the slight differences in the background already. And that was only a 40 to 70 day window of what we've seen footage on. So until we have the games in hand, let's not just jump on the battle animation hate train as if that's the only thing that Game Freak is talking about. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of people talk about, oh, they're going to patch the game, they're going to do raids, and that's going to introduce stuff, yada, yada, yada. I would love that to be the case, but I'm not overly optimistic with that at the current moment. And I say that because you don't give bad news without some kind of dressing to it if it can be helped. If they knew that the rest of the decks, of the National Dex, would be coming at a later date, they would have told us that up front. They would have softened the blow, but they didn't. They only had the bad news to deliver, which means that there was no committed plan to at least letting us know that they will eventually be there. So while I think it would be great if they did different raids all the time and that maybe brought some new stuff in, or if there was an update coming, which I would hope for the case, I think they honestly would have said that given the news they were delivering. But there might be some hope just because an article came out earlier today with Junichi Masuda again saying that nothing has been concretely decided what's happening going forward, but they haven't said if they're ever going to do it. So we need to just take that into consideration. Him saying it's not decided does not mean that eventually we'll get it, but him saying it's not decided does not mean that we'll never get it. It's still in limbo. And lastly, just don't be a dick. At the end of the day, these are still people. They're still game developers who are trying to produce a product. If you are not happy with the product, do not buy it, because that is how you hurt a company's ability to produce, is if you show them you're not happy with the decisions and you choose to not purchase. By being loud on the internet and still buying the game, you did nothing to help your cause. But even so, there's no reason to tweet at these people death threats. There's no reason to tweet hateful things at these people because they're still people at the end of the day. Masuda had to leave the internet entirely around Go's launch because of how people were just constantly bombarding him. Think about it. Would you want to wake up one day to a hive mind of people just attacking you for a decision that does not affect their personal life and have that continue for months? Because I don't think you would. And you need to look at the position Masuda is in, because he is essentially the linchpin of a franchise that has hit numbers that most companies would dream about hitting. It cannot be easy to be in his spot. So let's at least acknowledge that. And if you're going to give criticism, at least give constructive criticism. Be an adult. I know I'm asking a lot on the internet, but at least be an adult. But anyway, now that we've set some foundation, I figure I'll give my opinion on this. I'm disappointed, I'm sad, and I'm strangely upset. Not because I'm just going to pour it over my National Dex and call it a day. Not because I think the meta is going to be super affected and it's going to be a problem to play. because we all played pre-Bank XY and that was fantastic. But what I'm upset and sad for is that this seems to go against everything the company has been promoting for the last 20 plus years since Red and Blue. And that at the end of the day, somebody's favorite is getting left out. Someone won't have their favorite Pokemon, their team that they've brought with them since Ruby Sapphire, Emerald, whatever their first game was that could be transferred up, that might not be in the game. And that is unfortunate. I understand where they're making their decision. Logically, I get it because we've essentially been preparing for this if you've been paying attention. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to piss and moan about it on the internet and threaten people. I'm not going to tweet nonstop about it and hope that me being annoying and a thorn in the side is what changes the game. And not that there's anything inherently wrong with making your voice known. I'm more frustrated in that it just seems to go against the principles of the franchise. So I understand it. I'm disappointed by it. And I hope there's something that can be corrected. But realistically, I'm still going to play the game. I'm still going to enjoy the game. The game looks fantastic. And I hope that this doesn't leave a sour taste in my mouth and everyone's mouth going forward if this truly is the decision that is going to happen with this paradigm shift. And while I can't speak for them, I would at least like to assume that nothing would skip a full game. Or a full, multiple games is what I mean. I don't think whatever's cut out of Sword and Shield, I can't imagine that same thing not appearing in the next game. Especially if there's no flag checking in home of what can and cannot be sent. Because home is one way up to everything but Sword and Shield. And I would hate for someone to transfer something that they then don't have access to for a couple years because it's just sitting in a cloud. So hopefully that stuff gets taken care of. Hopefully there's a solution that can be implemented, if anything, because we're on the Switch. Things can get patched, things can get updated, and home is not scheduled to be out for a couple months after the games, which means home theoretically could be delayed and they could pair the home launch with the rest of the updates for whatever is missing. That in itself is entirely possible if that's how they're going to support the game or what their resources allow for. But to expect everything to change for launch day, I don't think that is realistic in the slightest. But at the end of the day, it's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be sad about it. But just be a decent human being. Jesus, I didn't think I had to say that.